ABC Chair Kim Williams is addressing the National Press Club.
Friends and colleagues, and hopefully to make new ones. I commence by offering acknowledgement to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, the traditional custodians of these ancestral lands, and recognise their enduring connection to the land and waterways around us. I pay respect to elders past and present, and to elders of other communities in Australia. Colleagues, as a true believer in Australian creativity, I start with an image from one of our most celebrated works of literature. In George Johnston's masterpiece, My Brother Jack, set in the 1930s, the narrator, a journalist named Davy Meredith, has the task of boarding the great steamships arriving in Melbourne every Monday morning to interview important visitors from Europe to get first-hand accounts of what was going on in the rest of the world 12,000 miles away. This had been a standard Australian news-gathering technique since before the submarine cable and the radio had turned it into an indulgence. Even by the 1930s, the information and views the visitors brought was already weeks old. This news, Johnson writes, rather than being something that was actually happening now, had the quality of the light of a distant star. This scene, taken from Johnson's own experiences as a journalist at the Argus, reminds us there was once a time when the news of the world drifted towards Australia with such tepid velocity that we felt compelled to go out to meet it. Not so now. We are a geographically large country at the bottom of the world whose language is the lingua franca, English. We can receive, read and absorb almost everything instantaneously. This gives us great advantages, but it also leaves us uniquely vulnerable. Where once we couldn't get enough information, and where once that information was mostly factual and reliable, we are being flooded with content, some of it dubious, some of it downright lies. That trickle of information we once rushed out to bring ashore has become a tsunami, breaking through our feeble levees, washing over us, surging through the streets to potentially reshape our mental landscape, especially in the minds of our young. Like all tsunamis, it drags ashore sharp, dangerous objects. Misinformation, false information spread due to ignorance, error or mistake, sometimes without intention to deceive. And disinformation, the deliberate spreading of false information and narratives to achieve malicious intent. The products of Vladimir Putin's bot farms, Andrew Tate's poisonous misogynistic videos, AI tools in the hands of our enemies and criminals, lies intended to spread confusion, exploit vulnerability, sow division, destroy resolve. Australia and similar countries have recently started to realise the profound damage this can cause, especially in an era of increasing global tension and military conflict. As French President Emmanuel Macron remarked earlier this year when speaking of Europe, we are living in an era of cultural clash, driven by digital social networks and the digitisation of society, in which we are losing our capacity to produce our own national narrative, making it impossible to build our own future. In the digital world we all now inhabit, Macron argued, information has become an issue of national sovereignty. Let's be clear. If we do not provide our people with trusted information, we will increasingly tell ourselves stories that are not really about us, but part of an extended global imaginary, our own story disappearing under the waves. It's already happening. That tsunami of overseas generated content breaching our information defences is now competing for the affections, hearts, minds and aspirations of our people. Most dangerously, it is targeting the next generation of Australian children, teenagers and young adults, compromising their confidence about and knowledge of Australian history, Australian stories, Australian accents and Australian values in ways that may harm our future. This is damaging our social cohesion, weakening the links between our regions and cities, generating unnecessary cultural conflict, and weakening us. We must counter it. Our first line of defence is to create an environment in which facts from credible sources predominate. Strengthening our nation's news capacity is essential. The ABC's news output is already impressive, with some 16,000 original content news items published monthly and with engagement scores that exceed 660 million minutes on the recently measured, for example, monthly figures in April, with a profusion of audio and video offerings amounting to several thousand a month and with significantly increased reach and engagement. But we must make it even stronger. This will require extra investment, but also a commitment to the most important quality of journalism: objectivity. That's why, since taking the job as chair of the ABC, I have been insisting that all of our journalists adhere, always, to the highest standards of objectivity and professional ethics. We do not serve causes at the ABC, we serve the truth. This is non-negotiable. We will sometimes make mistakes, but when we do, we will acknowledge them, correct them, and redouble our efforts to avoid them in the future, as we have done in recent times. Our processes are and will remain robust and under vigilant editorial review. Our nation more broadly is beginning to focus on the dangers of the information age, examining potential new defences, including a media bargaining code, a digital platform levy, social media restrictions for the young, all of them incredibly tricky and difficult to put in place. However, there is a collective sense that action needs to be taken. As the poisoned waters of the tsunami rise, it's good to get the young, especially, into lifeboats. They are particularly vulnerable to the flood. Their minds are precious assets needed for our future success. But lifeboats are always flimsy protections against surging tides. And one day our young will have to swim for themselves in the poisoned seas. So they and everyone else will need to be better prepared. We must therefore get better at exposing misinformation, correcting disinformation, and arming Australians with the skills needed to counter both.